Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is April 10th, 2025, and let's get to the news and map updates happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? So I know I haven't made an update in a little bit in a few days, and I've been working on a special project, which I will share with you guys. I'll give you more details over the next few weeks, but I'm very excited about this. So I apologize in advance I wasn't able to make a video in the last few days, but there's some good stuff happening in a few weeks. So first of all, I want to cover the map changes. There's been a few updates I want to give you guys. Nothing major, but just some important events that occurred over the last few days. And first, I'll start with Kursk. We've gotten a confirmation by the Ukrainians that the Russians, you may say it's the beginning of their summer or spring offensive, but they're now pushing really hard around Kursk and Sumy. So we know that right now Ukraine still occupies about 50 to 80 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast in Russia. You can see that in blue. So there's a lot of fighting ongoing right now in this area, in the Suja region, between the Ukrainian forces in Sumy and the Russian forces in Kursk. And there's been a lot of back and forth fighting by the border. The Ukrainians mentioned that there was a Russian unit that was able to break through the border, and they attacked the small village of Basivka, which is located in Sumy, about 5 kilometers from the border. And the Ukrainians were successful at dislodging and destroying this Russian grouping of forces. So what we're seeing is exactly what I've been saying over the last few weeks, is that there's going to be a lot of gray areas, unfortunately, by the border between Kursk and Sumy. Again, it's not like the fighting will happen exactly at the borderlines. There will be buffer zone on both sides. So that's what we're going to be seeing over the next few months here. As of course, the Russians have been able to accumulate a large grouping of forces here over the last few months. About 60 to 65,000 Russians and North Korean soldiers are present in this entire region. So we should be expecting more offensives by the Russians and as well by the Ukrainians. As we've been seeing in Belgorod a few weeks ago in March, Ukraine launched a small little incursion in Belgorod, and they continue maintaining a position here. And maybe in the future, who knows, Ukraine might launch another small incursion elsewhere, maybe in Belgorod, maybe in Kursk, maybe in Bryansk in the north, who knows. But we're seeing that it goes both ways. And also one thing I want to mention is that the Ukrainians have been utilizing a lot more often now the French Hammer bombs against Russian positions, using MiG-29s and also F-16s, and also the French Mirage jet fighters have been provided to Ukraine. Ukraine has really increased its air attacks against Russians with these specific bombs provided by the French as well, which have been having a very great destructive effect against Russian HQs and administrative buildings, whether it be in occupied territory in Ukraine or also in Kursk. There's been a few videos shared by the Ukraine military of their successful attacks against Russian positions with these bombs. So that is also another very positive thing that I've been seeing in the last few weeks. There was also a recent video that was shared by the Ukrainians of them hitting a Russian ammunition dump in HQ in Tyotkino using these hammer bomb bombs, not missiles, dropping them off with the MiG-29. So some good developments, and a big thank you to the French for providing these bombs. They have been crucial at destroying these Russian HQs. Additionally, I want to give you guys another update, more of course in eastern Ukraine, in Toretsk. There was another update provided to us by the Ukraine military, very surprising to me. But then again, the front line is very porous, so we need to understand that as well. There was a Russian grouping as well that was able to break through in Toretsk, and they reached this village of Pleshchivka that is about 7 kilometers away from Toretsk. So an armored convoy of Russians was able to break through, but thankfully the Ukrainians were able to pinpoint where they were exactly, and they destroyed them before they could reinforce their positions with more Russians. But that was a very dangerous situation that unfolded a few days ago. And so the Ukrainians shared that story today, indicating that they were able to fully destroy this Russian grouping. This reminds me of something that happened a few months ago. I believe it was in 2024. Where the Russians were able to also break through in the Kupiansk direction. And there was a video shared of them just kind of passing through. And actually, apparently they got lost. They didn't know where they were going. They thought they were going in a completely different direction. But as a matter of fact, they went through kind of this northern part of Kupiansk in this sector specifically. So they were able to send a Russian unit here And, there was this massive gray line here, which indicated a Russian breakthrough. But thankfully, it was a small unit with a BMP, I believe. So that kind of reminds me of a similar situation that occurred in Toretsk as well. But that just shows us that it's not like the entire front line is manned with Ukrainian soldiers at every forested area, or there is a position throughout this contact line. There is some porous areas where definitely both sides can use to their advantage. So that's the situation with Toretsk. Very dynamic right now, and the Russians continue on pushing really hard on different sides. That is in Chasiv Yar, which they've been trying to take for almost a year with very intense battles ongoing, and also in Toretsk. So very difficult battles and urban battles as well, in the middle of a city that is completely destroyed as well. I need to highlight that Toretsk and the city itself no longer exists. It's completely destroyed by Russian artillery and drones as well. So drones here are rampant. They're flying on both sides, and that also complicates the defense of the city. And last but not least, I wanted to give you guys an update. The Russians are also pushing really hard right now in the western side of Pokrovsk. And they shifted their focus actually, rather than trying to push towards Pokrovsk, the Russians now in the last week or two have shifted their offensive more towards in the Kurakhove direction and Velika Novosilka direction. So right now we're seeing that there's some small gains by the Russians in the last few days. Very, very minimal gains. Again, they continue crawling slowly, but the Ukrainians are trying to maximize the casualties on the Russians. I think we know why the Russians are putting a lot of focus here is because they're very close, well, actually throughout here in the western side of Pokrovsk. They're about a few kilometers away from the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. For them, it's very symbolic. Just being able to claim that they have reached Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is a huge win for Putin, right? He can then boast about it and say that, look at the Russian military, unstoppable, even if it's 0.01% of Dnipropetrovsk that they hold or would be able to take it. For the Russians, it doesn't matter. So I think that's why they're shifting their focus here. And also because it's a lot more open, there's less density here compared to Pokrovsk area, where there's a little bit more, there's more density of villages. So it's harder for the Russians to break through here. So I'll keep you guys updated here, but there's clearly an indication, as it's been mentioned by Zelensky, by the commander-in-chief, Syrsky as well, that the Russians are planning over the next few weeks to launch a massive offensive for the spring and the summer. And as I've said, it's my personal assessment, my personal opinion. This could be the very last major offensive that the Russians will be able to make, because I can't see them do this in 2026 again in 1 year, when we know that at the beginning of this year, based on the analysis by the channel called Covert Cabal, in January, he mentioned that Russia had about 1,500 tanks in storage in Russia that were in okay condition. 3,000 total, but only half of them were in decent condition, so they would be able to refurbish them and modernize them to use them then in their offensive operations. Still a very big amount, but nowhere near the amount that they started back in 2022, which I believe was around the 6,000 to 7,000 mark. So they've lost quite a lot of tanks since then. And again, I'm not going to lie to myself, even if Russia was at 0 tanks tomorrow, that still wouldn't stop them. We've seen the Russians utilizing scooters, civilian vehicles, donkeys, etc. to continue attacking Ukrainian positions, but they haven't been very effective with that. Tanks are effective. They still provide security, coverage for Russians, and most importantly, they can also fire and be lethal. So it's not the same ballgame. And when Russia runs out of tanks and armored vehicles, that's where the problems will start accumulating for the Russians, because they simply won't be effective in their offensives anymore. And we're already seeing the signs. I've already told you guys that, yes, the Russians are still able to accumulate a certain grouping of armored vehicles and then attack, but that is more and more rare, where they can launch over a dozen armored vehicles in one single formation attacking Ukraine position. That is more rare than ever before. Like last year was pretty recurrent. We could see it throughout the front line that the Russians would be able to do this almost on a daily basis. Now that is no longer the case, and they maybe can do this on a weekly basis, maybe every 2 weeks, but it's more and more rare. So their decay is happening quite quickly. So that's my assessment of the situation right now. I'll keep you guys updated over the next few weeks as well. Now, let's go back to some two updates that I want to give you guys. And first, let's talk about it, is the Chinese nationals being captured by Ukrainian forces. So that happened a few days ago. The Ukrainians confirmed that they captured Chinese mercenaries. And we had some insights from these Chinese mercenaries as to, how they were equipped by the Russians and how they feel they were generally treated by the Russians. And here, this Chinese national that was interrogated by the Ukrainians mentions that he was only given an AK-74 rifle, and he was with a Russian soldier at the time that he was attacked by Ukrainian drones during one of these attacks that they made. He also stated that in Ukraine captivity, he was fed and generally treated much better compared to the Russian army. So even the conditions in captivity, under captivity, are far better than the conditions of him being free, technically, in the Russian army. And when he was asked about a possible exchange, he said that he doesn't want to come back to Russia and wants to go back to China. And he also mentions that China is not looking for him. So I don't believe a lot of people were saying in the last few days that this is proof that China is directly involved in this war. I have to highlight the fact that I don't believe that this is a systemic Chinese policy. There's probably a few hundred Chinese mercenaries. It's not the first story we've heard of that. But it is clear, however, that even though this is not a systemic policy where they're just providing soldiers to Russia like North Korea is, that China is ready to turn or close its eyes, knowing that there are hundreds of these Chinese mercenaries fighting with the Russians. So they don't care about it. And again, it proves once again that the Chinese are assisting Russia, whether it be by providing mercenaries and turning a blind eye, or also providing the key components and goods that Russia needs to continue fighting, and also purchasing the Russian resources such as cheap gas, oil, and other raw materials, which then funds the Russian military. So that is problematic, and that makes us, we need to understand that China is not our ally here, and they're fighting against Ukraine as well, whether it be directly or indirectly. And again, just some food for thought, Ukraine is literally fighting against multiple nations at the same time right now. Ukraine can only count on itself. Yes, there are foreign volunteers, but these are volunteers. They can always leave whenever they want. And thank God we have volunteers from all over the world fighting for the Ukraine military, whether it be American volunteers, Canadian volunteers, European volunteers, or even South America from Colombia or Brazil. There's many volunteers right now fighting for the Ukraine military, but they're fighting against different multiple nations right now. Of course, there's Russia, there's North Korea that is directly involved now in providing troops to Russia. We have foreign mercenaries from China, also the Sahel region in Africa, where Russia's cooperating with these dictatorships in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and it's an easy prey for them because people there are desperate for for money, and so they're easily recruited by Russians. And of course, there's Iran as well, which is providing technical military assistance to Russia as well, although their partnership is very shaky right now. But just some food for thought that Ukraine is really doing a fantastic job, and there's really not a lot of countries that are assisting them directly with boots on the ground. So we need to realize what type of monumental job Ukraine is doing right now, fighting against all these different armies and professionals or mercenaries. And last but not least, let's talk about a successful Ukraine operation a few days ago. This was confirmed by the Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, who mentions that Ukraine was able to destroy another Tupolev 22M3 bomber a few days ago after a drone basically destroyed it. And this happened in the Kaluga region in Russia, that is just north of Bryansk, where after landing, this Tupolev 22 M3 was destroyed by a Ukrainian drone. There was also several ammunition depots in this airfield that Ukraine was able to attack. And the satellite images do confirm signs of strikes by Ukrainian drones on this airfield. So this is another great Ukraine operation. Let's not forget that I believe 2 weeks ago, there was a Tupolev 22 M3 that crashed in Russia. And so Russia doesn't have many of them left. According to the Ukrainian intelligence, GUR, they mentioned that Russia in 2023 had about 27 22 M3 left. And of course, in the last few years, Russia has had quite a few of them being destroyed, damaged, etc. So they have about 20 aircraft left, and Russia doesn't have the capabilities to build them anymore. Those Soviet components, they don't have many of them, and they don't have the manufacturing capabilities to build these bombers from the ground up. So this is a huge loss. Now, the value of these bombers ranges between $100 to $200 million. I'm not quite sure what the amount is, but even if we were to say it's $100 million, that is a massive loss for the Russians. $100 million USD is not cheap whatsoever. That can give you about 3 Su-34s as well. An Su-34 costs around 30 million, if I remember correctly. So that's a massive loss for the Russians, and they've had 2 of them in the past 2 weeks. So this is great news as well. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my updates. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about the spring offensive by the Russians. Do you think it's going to be happening soon? Do you think it's just talk by the Russians? I'm eager to hear your opinions, because your opinion is just as good as mine here. We can only be guessing, and we don't know what's really happening until it happens. So a big thank you for your support. I'm very grateful for it. Continue supporting the Ukrainian military because they need your help. We need to continue funding the drone program because they're doing great work at eliminating as many occupiers, Russian occupiers, as possible. And we're going to get there. So big thank you, and Slava Ukraini.